a while since I've been here. I was telling people the last time I remember giving a lecture, I was using a slide projector, so that
things have
kind
changed,
of dates me, doesn't it? But it's really always enjoyable to be here. The last time I was here was when you had the guys from Dust Devil, Don and Terry, and they're old friends of mine, so I came just to lend moral support. But I've been here a bunch of times going way, way back. And I'm actually kind of a GIA alumnus myself. When I was writing the paperback that I wrote in 1975 called Gems and Jewelry, there's a copy back there. After I had finished the book, I wanted to make sure that I hadn't forgotten anything. And Dick Liddicoat was a good friend of mine. So I called him up and I said, look, Dick, I don't have time to take these courses, but I want to buy all 3. And he said, okay, great. So he sold me all the diamond colored stone gem ident, and I went through all of it to make sure that I hadn't forgotten anything important. And when I finished that, I wrapped up the manuscript and sent it off for publication. And then I actually started taking the courses. So I never really quite finished, but anyway, that's my history with GIA. And of course, I've been friends with the organization for a long time. So anyway, when Angela invited me to do this, I was really happy to do it and decided to get out and do something like this. And after I told her what I had in mind, I suddenly realized I was crazy because the subject that I picked, collector to commercial, A Journey of Gemstones, this is the entire history of the gemstone industry. And I said, okay, I think I bitten off maybe a little bit more than, but the more I got into it, I started working on this in July, okay, and just kept adding and adding. So let's just do this, and hopefully there's a lot to look at, and I'm going to go pretty fast. Yeah. So if you need me to back up or stop or whatever, then please just tell me. You know, this is forward. What am I doing? Oh, I'm taking the wrong one. That's what I'm taking wrong. Nope. Wrong one. Sorry. Oops. So let's start out with the basics. What is a gem? And if you talk to the old timers in the trade, a gem is hard, a gem is durable, a gem is beautiful, a gem is rare, a gem whatever. These are all adjectives. You can't define things with adjectives. You define things with nouns. So when I wrote the first edition of the Color Encyclopedia, this is 40 years ago, this year, 40 years, oh my God. I proposed a definition of the gem that kind of escaped all of that stuff. And I suggested that a gem, with notable exceptions like pearl and amber and so forth, the organics, is a mineral that's cut and polished for ornamental purposes. Once you establish that, then you can get into adjectives like hard gems, soft gems, rare gems, beautiful gems, ugly gems. There are some. And you get a nice tight definition that you can use to expand the discussion properly. Then the terms precious and semi-precious. You look it up in the dictionary. Precious is high value, semi-precious is less value than precious. Except that a demand toward garnet in today's market is $10,000 a carat. And you can buy diamonds for $100 a carat. So what's precious and what's semi-precious anymore? So the terms are completely meaningless, and not that they ever will be, but they should be abandoned. And then the next one is the most interesting one, which is the idea of a market of, everyone talks about the colored stone market and the diamond market. So that's the historical reference, a marketplace of both diamonds and colored stones. The color of a stone can be either idiochromatic or allochromatic. Idiochromatic means the structure and chemistry determine the color, like malachite. It's always green, copper carbonate. That never varies, and the color is due to the copper and the structure of the mineral. Allochromatic, other colored, means that something else, you have an intrinsically colorless material that's being colored by some kind of chemical impurity. And perfect examples are the beryls and the tourmalines and so forth, which are waste baskets for anything that's floating around in the geological environment, and everything creates a color. So I say, what is the rarest color in diamonds, the kind that we grade? Forget fancies, the strong colored one. What is the rarest color in diamond? D?
D.
What is D color? No color. Flawless, they're colorless. And very few of them are. What does that mean? Everything else is color. So to talk about diamonds and colored stones, when 99.9999% of all diamonds are not white, they're colored, is absurd. It's an insanity to talk about things like this. So the bottom line is all gemstones are colored stones, and that includes diamond, and especially when you think about fancy diamonds, which are the rarest and most expensive of all the gemstones. All gems are colored stones. How many are there? So we have approximately 3,800 mineral species. Believe it or not, as many as 500 of these have been cut. Some of them just to see, can I do it? Honda, you know all about this. You know, you get the rare stone cutters that, I know somebody in New York. I grew up in New York and was a member of the New York Lapidary and Gem Society for years. And we had a guy there that was an experienced cutter. He cut ice. He actually faceted ice in a cold room and all that, just to see if he could do it and what it looked like. So anything is fair game. So 500 of these minerals have been cut. And you don't see most of them. They're kind of crazy collector stones. But they're still considered gems. So what is the process that converts a mineral into a gemstone in the first place, and why do we care? And we care because gems have always played a role in human society. In prehistory, ancient cultures, they were used as ornaments. They had magic, shells and stones and bones and whatever was ornamental in those days. But then as civilization grew, some of these things had very unusual properties. They were hard, they had bright colors, so these became magical objects. And there were very few of them, and so only the most powerful could afford to own them or had the power to take them from you if you own them. And so there were only a few known gemstones, and they became symbols of wealth and power. Later in history, the rise of empires, you had the army coming over the hill in this direction, so you need to go that way. What do you carry? Whatever you can of value, and so gems became portable wealth. High value in a small space, put it in your pocket. And there are so many wonderful stories. There's about Marco Polo coming back from his trips to China and so forth with the gems sewn into their clothing. You have to read all these great stories. And then finally, the growth of what we call modern societies. Healing powers and status symbols, check, still. Now many more gems are known, and the market base for gems has increased as affluence has increased around the world. But what you have to remember is that every gemstone started out as a collector stone. Why? Because people couldn't own these things. They were rare, they were not available, and only the royalty and the wealthiest merchants could afford to actually possess these things. And we have historical precedents, you know, the treasures that you see in ancient societies, like Egypt and so forth. But it was not only due to their rarity and their high cost, but gems had something else going for them. They were important symbols of magic, and they had power. Now, you can look all this up, the history of calendars, but even as far ago as ancient Egypt, the Egyptians had a calendar of 12 months and equal months of 30 days. And then that changed with Roman times, and then we all know about Pope Gregory and the Julian calendar and all that, and fine-tuning how long the days are and leap years, etc. But that number 12 has had tremendous historical significance, astrological significance within the society and so forth. The breastplate is a perfect example of the importance of gems. The breastplate of the high priest of Israel, and this is now prehistory practically, ancient times. We don't really know what those stones were. They're described in great detail in the Old Testament. But even with 1,000 references to gems in the Bible, more than 1,000, we can't, the descriptions are so vague from our point of view that we really don't know what they are. The one that we really actually know the best, and we'll come around to this at the very end of this talk, is the one they call sapphirus blue, which means blue in Latin. But they describe it as an intensely dark blue stone with gold particles, gold specks. So it's lapis. And lapis is a stone the trade routes for lapis go back 7,000 years. So that was the gem that the ancients called sapphire as a blue gem, not the stone today that we call sapphire. And yet everyone thinks sapphire is blue, and we all know the way the trade reacts to this. But the point is that symbolism and magic power became part of every society. And so gems were important in every society. And people constantly look for mystical relationships between gem properties and the number 12 and all of these astrological and religiously symbolic things. The 12 stones in the breastplate, the months of the year, the signs of the zodiac. And this is true, interestingly, in all societies around the world. It pops up in one way or another. And so you have all these different charts of the different stones for the months and the zodiac. And it finally got to where you have gems for the days of the week and the hours of the day. I mean, it's gotten completely out of hand. But it has this historical significance. And eventually it got so out of hand that people tried to standardize what the gemstone lists should be. There was one proposed in 1870. It was adopted, modified, and we have the kind of birthstone list that we're all familiar with. But there are many of them around the world and in different societies. You go different places, you find different lists. And the lists are constantly being changed and updated. What's really interesting is, and now we're going to get into the meat of this, which is the growth of the importance of gems in society and what's happened to the market for gemstones. The Age of Enlightenment, industrialization, late 1700s, early 1800s, mass markets grew for gems because there became a middle class. Industrialization made it possible for average people to have enough money to actually afford these things. In the modern age, you have huge advances in communication, transportation, and basically anything that you can dig up out of the ground has now become fair game for ornamentation, and so that's why you have 500 different things being cut as gems. So gems have become a staple of commerce as a result of mass market demand and improvements in production, distribution, etc. And so then you look at what factors are actually governing supply and demand. And I decided to call them icks and shuns. And I can get away with this because Mark Twain, who was always made fun of the English language, somebody asked him one time, how do you spell fish? And he said, G-H-O-T-I is how you spell fish. G-H as in enough, O as in I as in O as in women, and T-I as in nation. Fish, G-H-O-T-I. So I can talk about icks and shuns. And these are the things that are contributing to the supply and demand. The icks are things like demographics, economics, politics, logistics, and the shuns, as you can see. So let's look at those individually. Demographics is really, really interesting. And I hope I don't screw up. Pointer. Okay. My cat's toy will retain its juice. Going back to 5000 BC, and I've done enough research to put actual historical things next to these time periods. But what's interesting is that according to the people who have studied these things, 5000 BC, there were 5 million people in the world. 1000 BC, there were 50 million people in the world. This was the time of the beginnings of organized religion, the Persian Empire. Before that it was prehistory, Bronze Age, etc. So to go from 5 to 50, a tenfold jump in population, took 4,000 years. Then we come down to here. By the time of the Renaissance, there's 500 million people in the world. So to go from 50 million to 500 took 2,500 years. From 500 million to 5 billion, roughly from 1600 to 1990, 400 years, another order of magnitude. And now there are over 7.5 billion people. So you can see that the huge increase in global population has compressed the entire structure of all the global marketplace, and it's been an exponential curve in the growth of, let's call it not necessarily demand, but potential demand. More people. More people means more buyers, more bodies, and we'll see how that comes about in a minute. So economics affects demand. As affluence increased around the world through the Renaissance, trade, the rise of a merchant class, the Industrial Revolution, a bigger merchant class, and finally a middle class. World War II and the Reconstruction, an even bigger middle class, and a huge increase in global wealth created by science and technology. And finally, 1990 to the present, and we'll see this a little bit later, the creation of enormous new middle classes in those three places, Russia, India, and China, has had a rather dramatic impact. We'll get into more detail about this later. Politics affects both supply and demand. The change in a political system can dramatically affect the supply of a gemstone. The perfect example is tanzanite. Tanzanite was discovered in around 1968-69 in Tanzania, and it was called blue zoisite. That's the name of the mineral. And I remember when the first stones, I was getting to work at the Smithsonian back then in 1970, and we were seeing these cut, beautiful, big, huge blue cut stones, 100, 200 carat stones coming through, and they were blue zoisite. Then Tiffany decided to trademark it. The demand went up, and in the middle of their campaign, mid-1970s, the government of Tanzania became socialist. They shut down the mines, kicked Tiffany out, so the demand was going up and the supply went to zero. So this kind of political impact can have an enormous effect on both the supply and the potential demand. We'll talk about that in a second. Socialism in Russia ended in 1989. I made 5 trips to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Novosibirsk between 1990 and 1993. And I witnessed the most remarkable change you can possibly imagine. After 100 years of domination by a ruling body, either a czar or a socialist government, whatever, suddenly these people could go out on the street, spread a towel on the ground, and sell stuff, a yard sale, a flea market. They could never do that before. The whole structure of Russian society changed, and there became a huge capitalist base. And I can tell you some great stories about early capitalism in Moscow in 1990, especially related to McDonald's. Remind me if you're interested. I'll tell you. And you could see this flourishing, like a pent-up demand. And so this created a tremendous redistribution of the wealth in the country. And the poor, unfortunately, the pensioners, the old people got shafted, and a lot of multi-billionaires were created, not evenly distributed. And then, of course, duties and tariffs have a dramatic effect on supply and demand. Look at Burma and the ban on Burmese imports, which has now been lifted, and the huge changes in equilibrium between supply and demand. And then, obviously, where do these stones go? If we're not allowing Burmese rubies to come into this country, they're still being mined and smuggled out. They just go somewhere else. So the whole distribution of gems around the world changes as a result of things like this. So politics changes a lot in terms of supply and demand. Then you talk about collector stones versus commercial. Jewelers can't sell what they can't get. It's one thing to say that a gem is beautiful and wonderful and everyone should own one, but if you can't get it, what's the point? And you're not going to get the jewelry industry to go out and demand a stone and try and sell it when there's no supply. So it's, again, an equilibrium. If a stone is too rare, you can never make it commercial. Then the abundance changes the value in the market, and there are so many stories about that. And here's the Tiffany example. Socialist government comes in, cuts the supply, prices go up. Then, so there's no tanzanite. Price goes to $2,000 a carat wholesale for fine stone. Then in the late 1980s, somebody said, well, there's those hills over there. I was at Merillani in 1980 and stood at the edge of the original D'Souza pit, and rusting Caterpillar tractors and all this stuff flying around. And there was nothing going on. And there was no other place to, there was one hole. That was the world supply of tanzanite. And they said, well, what about over there? And they discovered that, like, it's geology, there's a zone, and the mineralization continued into those hills. And all of a sudden, there was the potential for an unending supply of tanzanite, ending in Tanzanite 1 created. They paid $100 million for the rights to the leasing of those properties. And finally, not that long ago, Tanzanite gets awarded birthstone status. So we see the changes in the birthstone. Now Tanzanite's an alternative birthstone. So it went from a collector stone that nobody really knew about to the most commercial of all gems in 50 years. A process that once took a millennium has now been compressed into 50 years. And that's a result of improvement in marketing, technology, communication, transportation. Let's look at that. Logistics affects supply and demand. Okay? I have pictures just like this I took in the 70s in Sri Lanka. Hits in the ground, you know, go down, it collapses on you, you get killed, that kind of thing. And now modern equipment and large-scale gemstone mining, transportation, obviously, go to Pakistan like Debbie and I did in 1982, and this is what you see on the road. And now, of course, put something on a plane, it's wherever you want in the world within hours. The marketing goes from the bizarre, not B-I-Z-A, but B-A-Z, B-I-Z-A, to a global distribution network facilitated and purchasing facilitated by shopping malls, cell phones, and now, of course, the internet. So all of this has changed, both supply and demand being affected by the logistics of mining, transportation, marketing, etc. Production and distribution also, as again we've just said, gems are found mostly in underdeveloped or undeveloped, minimally developed countries, African countries, and poor Asian countries. There's the extraction not only was limited by technology, it's still limited by technology. Why? You don't know where these stones are. It's Swiss cheese. You have to just dig random holes in Sri Lanka, especially, dig random holes in the ground. There's no way to know where anything is underground in the gravel layers deep down. So extraction is limited. It's a long chain from where you find them to where you buy them. Modern tools can improve the production, but the geology of the resource still limits you. Pegmatite, beautiful source for aquamarines, all the rare phosphate gems, lithium gems like spodumene, blah, blah, blah. Important gemstones, but you mine a pegmatite, and it's this great big dike-like formation, and the gems are in pockets that could be from like apple size to basketball size or even bigger, randomly distributed in this rock. There's no way to use remote sensing to tell where they are because the pockets are filled with clay, so there's no clear distinction. It's like an open space. And you can go for a week digging through, and there's a pocket 6 inches in the wall over here, and you have no idea it's there. So geology is still a limiting factor in a lot of the most important gems. And plus, if you've ever seen mining in Afghanistan, these things occur in very remote places like, you go, you get it, I'll buy it from you, kind of thing. You don't want to go there. And then, of course, because of the limitations, the supply does not quickly react to increases in demand. So you call that inelastic. The supply is inelastic to demand. And this is what happened in the 1970s when we began our market, Osama and I and others, and people had inflation fears. Interest rates hit 22% in the late 1970s. The young people here don't remember stuff like that. And people were afraid of a hyperinflation, and the demand for gems just went like that. You could stand on a street corner and wave your arms, people would come and buy gems from you practically. Everybody wanted to get rid of cash. Well, the market had never seen a huge increase in demand like that, and the supply just couldn't keep up. And prices just kept going up and up and up. And that gave rise to a gemstone investment market, which is another whole discussion, which I won't go into now. Peaked in, so those of us who remember can laugh about it now. Okay.
Easy.
Superstition creates demand. This is historically true. Sympathetic magic. Nero watched the gladiatorial combats through an emerald lens because he believed that the emerald would pull the dust particles out of his eye and make his vision better. True story. Amber cures a sore throat. The rattles that you hang above a baby's crib started in the Middle Ages with people hanging little bits of coral, tinkle, tinkle, above a baby's crib because the coral had curative powers and prevented disease and that kind of stuff. Ruby clears the mind. Amethyst, amatustos, in Greek, not drunken. If you had an amethyst, you could not get intoxicated. The name of the gem is based on superstitious beliefs. So gems were thought to have magical and healing powers. Well, guess what? That kind of stuck around, and so gems have been prized in all cultures as magical objects, which adds to their value and the demand because of those properties. So these beliefs create demand, rarity affects the value, and changes in supply have a dramatic effect on the marketplace. What about fashion? Fashion drives demand. These are the shunts, remember, okay? IOM. But fashion is a function of trends, and trends can be set by royalty, by celebrities, and also now even by organizations that use color promotion as a way of deciding what the colors of everything should be next year. And then everybody rushes to get gems that are either, should they match, should they be complementary? It really doesn't matter. Okay? Whatever, the market is so big now, and there are so many colored stones, whatever they say are the colors, oh sure, we can find something that will either match or not match, depending on whatever the heck you want, right? Doesn't matter anymore. Information can affect demand. People buy what they know about. The great mistake of the jewelry trade, not remembering that an educated customer is your best customer. The easiest way to sell somebody something is just tell them what the hell they're getting. If you explain it to them, and the romance is actually not BS, it's education. And the jewelry trade as a whole has never really got that yet. That needs to change. Imagination is the future of the gem market. We're talking about all these wonderful new and interesting cuts, right, Tommy? Robotic cutting now, you can mass produce stones in quantity with precision. There's robotic cutting going on all over the world. Collector gems are going mainstream. We'll get to that in a minute. Falling price points are a result of the shift in global affluence, the great polarity between rich and poor. We'll talk about that in a minute. Lead to a demand for less expensive gems. But basically, where you end up with that argument is that anything that comes out of the ground is fair game, and anything can be cut, and anything can be sold. There's a market for everything that comes out of the ground. Communication, shun, creates a link between all of the above, information, education, and demand. Again, technology, marketing, advertising, and the growth in technologies like the internet means that all potential buyers of gems, wherever they are in the world, economic status irrelevant, everybody has the same shot at buying anything. Just have to have the money and a computer. Color varieties have even created a unique niche of their own niche, like green garnet and savarite, which again became a popular gem because it was found in Zimbabwe by Campbell Bridges. He used to live in Great Falls, by the way. I used to visit him all the time. He was a really incredible guy, brilliant geologist. In '61, and then it was rediscovered in Kenya in '67. And this is a result of Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, into through Uganda and into the southern Sudan, is what's called the Mozambique gem belt. It begins in Mozambique and goes right through the spine of East Africa, and it's all a highly metamorphosed, igneous metamorphic complex that's a host of all of these different amazing gems. And garnet, the Tsavorite is one of those, so it's found in these different places. Again, Tiffany named it Tsavorite after the Tsavo Park, and Bridges became the champion of it until he was hacked to pieces by a mob who tried to take over his deposit a few years ago. That's Africa. Mining is a tricky business, but it is rare. The fine greens are very rare in large sizes. Now there's another factor, which is other gems which the public really has never heard of for the most part, which are becoming commercial. We all know them, but they're not that well known to the gem buying public. Chrysoberyl, spinel, spodumene, tourmaline in all of its colors, even Tsavorite, still emerging, becoming popular, becoming very expensive, especially the rarest examples. And it's taking a while to load. Here we go. And even within that group, some of these new gems come in multiple colors. So you're getting the sense that there's this enormous matrix of gems, color varieties, sizes, colors, and prices. All of them mixed together. So keeping track of all of this as a dealer has become not as easy as it used to be in the good old days. So tourmaline in all of its colors, spinel, 100 colors, every color you can imagine in spinel. Zircon. And the public is little by little becoming aware of these, and with exceptions like spinel, unfortunately, but a lot of these are still relatively inexpensive compared to some of the so-called precious stones. So this demand for less expensive gems created a whole new marketplace. And we had this big economic crisis in 1988, 2008, 2009. The market crashed, and it led to, when it recovered, people started looking around for, well, I can't really afford that. Who knows what's going to happen next year, so maybe we should buy something cheaper. So there became an enormous interest in the jewelry marketplace for less expensive stones, which gets you into these collector gems, which are not well publicized. They're available, but they have never been commercialized because it wasn't worth anybody's while to do it, except now everybody wants something at that price point. Oh, maybe we should have a look at that. And so, as you can see from all the publications, this is from 2011, all these headline ads, demand for exotic gems rises. And exotic in their mind can be things like kunzite and certain colors of tourmaline, but not exotic in the sense that we know, some of us know, as collector stones. So let's look at those. And so for the next few minutes, I want to give you a kind of a gallery of some of the newer gems, which are actually appearing more and more in the market, in jewelry stores. These gems, 20, 30 years ago, were absolutely unknown to most gem people, most gemologists. They're still unknown to most gemologists. They're considered rare collector stones. But they're becoming mainstream because of this demand for new and different, cheaper. Price points are driving the market. What do I have for sale that my competition doesn't have? And there's this huge palette of things that are still out there that the marketplace is just figuring out. So let's go through a bunch of these. Andalusite has become a mainstream stone. Hard enough for jewelry, 6.5 to 7.5. Brown and green, intensely dichroic, and it's sort of an Alexander. People think that it's the poor man's Alexandrite because it has two colors. But you usually get both in the same stone, both brown and green, unless you cut it the right way. And it's one of 3 minerals that have exactly the same chemical formula but different structures. And they're all now being used as gems, as we'll see, andalusite, kyanite, and silimonite. So apatite, thank you, it's much better. This is what your bones and teeth are made out of, calcium phosphate, complex chemistry, and again, allochromatic. Any impurity makes it some kind of color. Oh, there's one more. That's it. There you go. Oh, great. Perfect. Hardness 5, but opal's 5.5. So maybe this isn't the greatest ringstone, but pendants, earrings, no problem. And worldwide occurrences, big sizes, completely clean, gorgeous when it's cut. Look at these stones. This is becoming a mainstream jewelry stone. One of the real rarities, benitoite, probably the best candidate for a truly American gem because it's a one locality stone for the most part, which is San Benito County, California. Hard and unbelievable properties, the color of sapphire and the dispersion of diamond. So these things look like blue diamonds. Really bright, full of color if they're cut properly. Cordierite, the gem name is iolite. African and Indian localities, very dichroic, intensely dichroic, gray and blue, and with a violetish tinge. But I remember back in the old days, reminiscing with Pisan, not Narinder, but Anil Dalakia had 100 carat size clean highlights. I've never seen anything like that. So they can come big. Nowadays, you're lucky to get a 3 or 4 carat, really nice, clean stone with good color. But it is available.
KK has in his collection, though. This one. KK has it in his collection.
KK has it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, lucky, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard, 7.5, good gemstone. And again, these are things that are emerging in the commercial market. Danburite, mainly, well, it comes from Sri Lanka, Burma, Russia, but the primary source for gem material really is Mexico, where it occurs in one mine. It's an accessory mineral, and it's brought out in miners' pails, which they would get fired if management knew they were doing it, but hey, they can make money that way. Gems up to 100 carats have been cut, but what's amazing about this is hardness 7, but these things look like white diamonds when they're cut right. Amazingly bright, just amazingly bright and brilliant stones, and available in commercial quantities. This is a crazy stone, diaspore, which is a basic aluminum hydroxide. It occurs in the outside of bauxite deposits. Bauxite is the chief ore of aluminum. And there's a gigantic deposit in Turkey, a major commercial source of aluminum ore. And in the fringes of this huge deposit, they found these diaspore crystals, which look like that. And this actually has a kind of a color change like in Alexandrite. It goes from a green to a pinkish, brownish color, which a lot of Alexandrites do also. And it's gone through iterations with different people trying to market it with different trade names, zoltanite, saarite. It's now selling for prices you would not believe. 1,000 a carat, wholesale, supposedly. I don't know who's paying that kind of money, honestly, but that's what they're asking for. Diopside, wonderful gem. Again, hard enough for even for rings, if you're careful. A rock-forming mineral, calcium, magnesium, silicate, occurs in wonderful stars. And these have been around forever. Very inexpensive, and sold along with black star sapphires as very inexpensive star stones. Have been very popular. But the faceted stones are great. What's really cool is chrome diopside, which comes from Russia, mainly, almost exclusively. And the best of this looks like the finest chrome tourmaline that you have ever seen, or the finest savarite. Very, very few emeralds reach the color of a top quality chrome diopside. It's very inexpensive relative to all the other gems. We're talking about Small size is 50, 60, 70, up to 100, 150 a carat. Very, very affordable and just spectacular gem. My favorite, in a sense, I've spent a lot of my life studying these gems, the whole group of feldspars. Feldspars are complex aluminum silicates of calcium, potassium, and sodium. There's a whole family of feldspars, many. They occur worldwide in primarily igneous and metamorphic rocks. But those rocks make up the bulk of the crust of the earth. Sediments like limestone, sandstone, by volume, are much less abundant than the igneous and metamorphic rocks. Somebody once calculated that if you took the whole crust of the earth, just the whole crust, ground it up into a powder, sifted it, made it uniform, and did a chemical analysis, the chemical analysis would be almost exactly the formula of a typical feldspar. That's how abundant feldspars are. So why, they're the most abundant minerals on the planet, why don't we see more of these in jewelry, as gems, cut stones? And the reason is that they're very rare as transparent materials. The feldspars are mostly opaque, translucent, but because of the complicated way in which they form, their internal structures give rise to all kinds of interesting phenomenal effects. Eyes, stars, iridescence, the moonstone, labradorescence. Inclusions in these feldspars create colors. Peristerite, which is a kind of a whitish labradorescence but without the blue. And so you have all of these different gems that come from different localities. Some have become popular on their own, like the Oregon material, which is labradorite, hardness 6 to 7, very, very beautiful. And it comes in all these colors because of copper impurities. Another occurrence, which is in Mexico, gave rise to material that is totally uniform in color. You could take 10,000 cut golden sunstones and spread them out on the table and not see any color variation. There's no gem on the planet that I can think of that is that uniform in color. It also happens to be harder than typical feldspars, more like 7, 6.5 to 7, takes an incredibly high polish. And I'll be able to show you what these look like in person later. But mostly people know the feldspars for the phenomenal effects. The main one nowadays becoming very popular because Madagascar is going crazy with production and there's labradorite everywhere. And everything from beautiful cut stones to bookends and you name it, they make it out of beads, make it out of labradorite. There's another locality in Finland which are phenocrysts in a lava, and the intensity of the labradorescence is stronger than in the Madagascar material, and it also comes in more different shades. Bright oranges, golden, dark greens, just incredible material, but unfortunately very rare and much more expensive and much less available. Fluorite, calcium fluoride, ubiquitous. Every mine on the planet practically has some fluoride as an accessory mineral, and it comes in all these colors. It's unfortunately too soft really for rings. Ford doesn't make it. But earrings, pendants, and people are using it. Beads, which is insane. The last thing in the world, we have fluorite beads, we sell beads, and they're all dinged up and they get scratched. And it's like, you don't want to make beads out of fluorite. But everything else seems to be fair game. What's cool about fluorite is it's the ultimate allochromatic mineral. Every chemical impurity that comes along changes its color. And so in an ore vein, as the solutions are flowing through over thousands of years, the chemistry changes, and it's sort of like the tree rings in a tree recording the growth of the fluorite crystal with color bands. And you get these incredible, this one is extraordinary, but the thing is, if you go from one part of a mine to another and you look at the fluorite crystals, you can match the pattern of banding and actually see where the solutions went and how they migrated from one place to another. Fascinating. This is a very strange stone, and I don't think most people are familiar with it, but I had to put it in. I have some of this. This is all my material. Gaspéite is nickel carbonate. It's very unusual material. It comes only from a couple places. Australia is the main source. And I think the reason you don't see much of it is that it's really not the greatest color. You know, it's a really cool color. Think of if you saw a car driving down the road this color, you say, wow, that's a really strange color for a car. And I think that's one of the reasons why it never quite has made it, although it comes in big pieces and it's wonderful for beads and carvings. By contrast, halite, calcium borosilicate, soft, relatively soft, and yet used for beads, carvings, decorative objects. What makes halite used so much is that it's porous enough to accept dye. You can make it any color you want. And it has this kind of a spiderwebby veining to it. And so it looks just like turquoise if you make it blue. And how many stones out there are being sold as turquoise that are dyed halite? It's one of the great problems of gemology, as we all know, is figuring out what is this thing. And it can be very, very convincing. Remember Andalusite?
Yeah.
So we have kyanite and sillimanite. Kyanite comes from Brazil, and I've had these stones from the 70s. They're really gorgeous. The problem with kyanite is triclinic mineral, and it has 3 different hardnesses in 3 different directions. And they're not subtle. Tommy, you know about this if you've ever tried cutting it. Just you cut this stuff, and you're cutting a hardness 4 material, and all of a sudden it goes to 7 in a different direction. It's really crazy. So it never quite got popular, but then, not that many years ago, they found this incredible dark blue kyanite in Nepal, and it just came in the market, and people had to have it just because the color was so sensational.
The one from Nepal is absolutely gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
I just got some.
Gorgeous.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no comparison between these
There's
two.
no comparison.
Absolutely.
But the problem is you can't get good cutting.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So you really need to somebody needs to really get this material and figure out how to cut it right, and it would be a lot more popular. Malachite has been around forever. You go to the Hermitage, the Tsar's summer palace in St. Petersburg. Been there. Dinner plates, like this big vases, all carved out of solid malachite from Russia. But the main deposits are in Africa and Zaire. Just beautiful material. Boxes, inlay, carvings, beads. Very uniform, a little on the soft side, but just gorgeous material, and has become very popular. Of all things, obsidian, which has been around since prehistory. I mean, arrowheads and things like that, Indian cultures and other places in the world, because it's volcanic glass, so it occurs all over the world. This kind of material, double flow, sheen obsidians, mostly this is Mexican material. Then they found this stuff, which is also from Mexico, and it's got patterns of microscopic inclusions and layers which give you these different colors. And so you can do carvings. It's great for cabochons. Very unusual, very unique material. Hard enough for almost anything. Pectolite. I went to this locality. I got to tell you a very brief story. Someone I met in the mid-'70s, and we're still close friends, Steve Sloan, lived in Santo Domingo. His father was the export vice president for Goodyear Tire. And he was interested in stones. And he found somebody selling this material, and he wrote me a letter, mid-'70s, and he said, we sent this material to the Smithsonian, and they x-rayed it and determined that it was pectolite. And they decided it had to be a synthetic because there is no such thing as blue pectolite. That's a true story, okay? So he said, but I've been to the place where this comes from. You have to come and see it for yourself and tell the world that this is not some kind of synthetic stone. So I went to the Dominican in, I think it was 76, and I spent a week down there, and we went to the deposit up in the hillside, and I watched them digging this material right out of the rock. There's no doubt. And now they're underground, and it's a huge mine, and it's the Caribbean's gemstone, and everybody knows about Larimar. Larimar is, the name comes from Larissa Mendez, and I met Mendez himself, who discovered it, the first guy who discovered it, on the beach. And he said this has to come from somewhere, not the ocean, and he tracked it back up into the hillsides and found the original locality, which is the one I visited. His daughter's name was Larissa. I have a wonderful slide of Larissa standing on the beach when she was about 8 years old, so she's like 50 now. And so he named it Larissa's Gem from the Sea, Larima. And that's the name that's associated with it. But the history is long gone. Prehnite, a wonderful gem, calcium silicate, hard enough for any kind of jewelry. Only two really commercial localities, Mali and Australia. The Mali material is really interesting, green, wonderful specimens, but the cut stones are not very pretty. The Australian material comes from a place called Wave Hill in the northeast corner of Australia. And you talk about the middle of nowhere. Like this is like beyond the middle. This is on the edge of nowhere, not even the middle. And the deposit covers more than 10 square kilometers, has been drilled to 30 meters with prehnite nodules all the way down. So there's like 5 million tons of prehnite in the ground in this one locality. More than enough to keep the world in prehnite for a long time. And it cuts beautifully, and it comes not only green, but this gorgeous, gorgeous golden, orange, yellow color. Stuff like this has been selling in China, and the green ones, and not so much the gold ones, but the greenish colors like the beads, this color here, has been selling in China for as much as $300, $400, up to $1,000 a carat, because it looks like jade. It looks just like apple jade, and it's translucent and it's hard, and they love it. Could be commercial. Rhodochrosite, beautiful as cut stones, unfortunately, really kind of more or less a collector stone in this form, as faceted stones, because there's not much you can do to wear it, plus it's very rare. 50 years ago, they discovered in Catamarca province in Argentina a cave that was a stalactite cave, just like Luray, only instead of calcite stalactites and stalagmites, it was rhodochrosite, so everything is pink. So you have these incredible, and when they first came in the market, I remember I was growing up in the lapidary business in New York as a teenager practically, and they were bringing in crates of stalactites up to that long. $12 a pound, and you and I that much. I remember. I didn't have the money. But it makes spectacular, not only jewelry, cabochons, but also decorative objects. Yes, hi.
They were doing faces of watches with those swatches of rhodochrosite.
Sure, as long as it's protected.
Right, and
Yeah.
because they were just real little thin slices.
Yeah, use it, and it's become not only popular but very expensive. And I have no idea how big the resource is. I truly don't. Similar looking material is rhodonite, manganese silicate. This is hard material. It comes mainly from Australia. There are a few other localities. And when you find it in place, there are some substantial deposits of rhodonite. So this could be commercialized for everybody. And silicate comes yellow and violet. Main localities are Brazil, Tanzania, and now from Pakistan or Afghanistan. I'm not sure exactly which side the deposit's on. Manganese makes it pink, but the iron stained variety or iron impurity variety, this golden yellow color. The Brazilian material looks kind of like this. It's sort of a straw yellow, almost like labradorite. But scapolite is intensely dichroic, and if the crystals are like pencils, and if you cut it this way, you get a paleo. But if you cut it down the C-axis, you get that. And I have a project that I've been working on for years. There is an enormous amount still in the ground in Tanzania. It's not being operated. And I have a connection to resume mining that material. It hasn't been in the market for 30, 35 years. But when you cut it down the C-axis, you get this unique, gorgeous orange color, which is highly commercial. So I decided to give it a trade name for this particular style of production. I call it Orifane, which is it's actually my own trademark. And what it means, it comes from Aureum, which is Latin for gold, and fane is the Greek phanein, And it's the same root as diaphaneity for the gemology buffs, which means transparency, level of transparency. So what this word means is gold you can see through, which I think is a really great name for
So,
a gem.
Joe, some of the intense purple is coming from Brazil.
There's
Very
purple now from Brazil.
purple. Gorgeous purple.
Wow, how cool is that?
Yep.
Okay. And it's really pretty too,
Mhm.
but what I've seen mostly are really
Nice
small
pieces.
ones. But the Tanzanian material, I have in the encyclopedia, they're 30 and 40 carat stones. You get big stuff. It's really nice. And here's the third dimorph, trimorph, Andalusite and kyanite, sillimanite. This material comes from India, and it is so bright you would not believe it, like blindingly bright. I don't know why. It's very hard, but if it's cut right, it is just spectacular. And people tend to know it more for the cat's eyes, which are really, really intense, sharp, narrow eyes in a dark matrix. They're quite extraordinary stones, and Ghazal, I'm sure, is familiar with it. Another gem that I think could have enormous potential is smithstone, zinc carbonate. All this material comes from a single locality in Mexico. But look at the stones. It comes blue, green, pink, highly translucent, hard enough for jewelry, and unfortunately limited production from this one locality. But most of this was mined as zinc ore, and I don't even know how many tons of this went into the crushers and were refined for zinc. What a tragedy. Nobody was thinking this way 30 years ago when there was a big production of this material. Sphalerite, zinc sulfide, is the major ore of zinc, and obviously spectacular. This is another allochromatic material where iron alone produces both the greens, yellows, and reds, ferric iron, ferrous iron, and worldwide localities because it's so abundant in mines, and unbelievably bright when cut. High dispersion, 4 times the dispersion of diamond, and bright, bright, bright. Han, you've cut sphalerite, haven't you? It's a little bit of a challenge to cut because it has dodecahedral cleavage.
It's a very messy stone.
I'm sorry?
Very messy stone to cut.
Messy stone to cut, yeah. And hard to cut. But if you do it right and get the right polish on it, it's really spectacular. This has become commercial. Titanite, calcium titanium silicate, hard enough for jewelry. Hey, opal hardness, garnets aren't much harder than this. Tanzanite's not much harder than this. But it has 0.051 dispersion. Diamond is 0.044. Higher dispersion than diamond. Look at the color play you get in a well-cut sphere. And from India, you get chrome sphenes, the likes of which you can't imagine.
Last year, over 11 carats, stone to die for.
Right.
Die for.
Well,
yeah, no.
I had the opportunity many years ago to get what I thought was the largest raw cut chrome sphene. It was almost the size of this. Okay?
Yeah.
And I made a huge mistake. I went for size and I had a stone cut that was 104 carats.
Wow.
Okay? But it had some little inclusions in it. And the problem is that then at the time nobody really knew, but you have to heat treat it gently, very gently, and you can lighten up the color and it turns to that, from a muddy dark green to that. But with inclusions in the stone, you don't dare heat it because the thing could explode.
Yeah.
So I ultimately sold the stone and it was recut into a 70 carat round, which I never knew what happened to it.
Oh.
Yeah, the good old days.
Oh my goodness.
One we've all heard about, sugilite, royal lavulite, royal Sibylle. So many people have tried to market this. One place in the world this comes from in commercial quantities, which is in the Kalahari Desert of South Africa, Kuruman, in the manganese fields. There's a mine that produces manganese ore. And in one part of the mine, they found this. Okay? It's a lithium silicate, but colored pink by manganese, purple. And the best of it being this incredible translucent material. The total amount that they estimated in the ground in this mine was like 15 metric tons. Total. And there were so many disputes and squabbles over the ownership that nobody could do any kind of coherent production, marketing, it was such a mess. Even the people who lived on top of the mine claimed the rights to the mineral that was under them, a nightmare. And so this material was available in the 70s, early 80s, and then just sort of disappeared. And you still see old material floating around in the market, but too bad it was never properly commercialized. The Suvianite, Idocrase. I did my PhD thesis on this mineral.
Wow.
I have a personal interest in it. But it comes not only in great crystals from all these different, all over the world, but cut stones are gorgeous. This stuff is almost exactly structurally and chemically like grossular garnet. And typically, like in Mexico, you get these big brown crystals with whitish, cream-colored grossulars stuck all over it. They grow together, they intergrow because the pattern of crystal structure is so similar in the two minerals. But the cut stones come brown, again, iron color, green, ferrous, ferric is brown and red, and manganese makes it pink. The material from Canada, asbestos, Quebec, very rare in cut stones, very rare, very small. Hard enough for jewelry. Variscite, an aluminum phosphate, not a copper mineral, but colored green by copper. And you have all these wonderful minerals that occur in these nodules from Fairfield, Utah. Has become a major collector, mineral collector material. But massive variscite from other localities is typically green, has a spiderweb pattern like turquoise, 3.5 to 4.5. It's a little bit on the soft side. Cabochon's worn carefully, no problem. So, new gems, like these we've seen, are only part of the story, but the whole structure of the gemstone industry is changing. We all know what's happening, those of us who are in the trade or connected to the trade. Retail is transforming. The internet is now the world's shopping mall. The millennials, right, Sam? The younger generations don't look at gems the way we did and our parents did, as investments, as stores of value. They're interested more in if somebody gives you a stone, it has a personal value because she gave it to me when we went camping in the Sierra Nevada. And that the emotional attachment of the event is what gives the stone value, not its intrinsic value. It's a whole different paradigm. And the other problem, of course, is that synthetics are killing the market, especially because most synthetics are cut, small stones are cut. If you have a 5-carat sapphire, spend $100, you get it certified, you know what it is. If you have a 5-point sapphire, you can't certify. It costs more for the cert than the stone is worth. So the vast majority of all the small stones coming in the market, nobody knows what the hell they are because they can't be analyzed gemologically. So the people who make these things in China and Bangkok and sift synthetics in with parcels of natural stones, and it has really crippled the mainstream jewelry industry because the big retailers now can't guarantee what they're selling you because they don't know. And they rely on suppliers, and their suppliers don't know. And that ripple effect is crippling the gemstone industry. So these problems are adding to the woes of the jewelry industry. Now, the millennials and the younger generations are concerned about environmental issues. Did the people who mine the stone get a fair salary? Do they get 2 weeks vacation? In the cutting factories, it has to be fair trade. We want to make sure that everybody who has their hands on these things gets treated fairly.
Yeah, AGT is working very hard, and I'm on their board. We are working very, very hard.
Ethics is a big thing in the jewelry industry now. Yeah. And then, of course, because of pure economics, price points are dropping. So this whole change in the industry is a reflection of the redistribution of global wealth, and also what do gems mean to people? Demographics, again, the expansion of the middle class. Look at this. New data suggests that the global middle class of 3.2 billion people is actually understated by 500 million people. Half the world's population can afford stones. Go back to the first slide of demographics. 5,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, how many people could afford to buy stones? And now you're talking about huge middle classes in Russia, China, and India. You've got half the world's population can afford gems. The rare stones are becoming hard to get. The price points are going down. Nobody can get the fine material. Did I skip a slide here? Oh yeah. The rich get richer. Polarization of wealth. So the billionaires, here's Forbes. A record for the richest people on earth jumped 13% to 2,000 billionaires with a total net worth of $7.67 trillion. So you get people like hightech.com and computer multi-billionaires can buy anything they want. Oh, I like that stone. How much is it? I don't care. Write a check. And that's the other end of the spectrum. So on one side, you have the mass market, which is getting bigger and bigger, with the wealth being distributed, but they can't afford these very expensive stones, so they're looking for more different kinds, cheaper. The jewelry industry is being pushed into a price point-driven market, but the rich don't care. So what's the future? Obviously, a demand for new and different materials. Political and social unrest. Do I have to tell you guys about political and social unrest? We're afraid to go out of the house. Will disrupt supplies, and the marketplace is being driven by availability and price. More emphasis will be placed on accuracy of sales representations because people are getting to want to know what the heck they're buying. And the Federal Trade Commission is making it so that retailers are going to have to be accountable for what they sell. And they don't know what they're getting, so that makes a real problem for them. Evolving fashion styles accommodates any color, any shape, any cutting. You want to cut this way? Great, we'll cut it that way. You want this color? We'll find something this color. That's the new market. Fashion drives it to a degree like never before. Retail venues are changing because the internet is putting the malls out of business. It was estimated not long ago that in 10 years, 20% of the malls in this country will be amusement parks for kids. 20%. They can't compete. So where can this marketplace find the future supply of gem materials? I started thinking about this a long time ago, and I actually wrote about it along with some articles about feldspar gems. And what I came up with is rocks. Lots of rocks, okay? And they're pretty. Rocks can be very pretty. And there's an infinite supply of rock on the planet. And so let's look at rocks. The most ancient of all gems is a rock. Lapis isn't a mineral, it's a rock. A rock is defined as a geological material that consists of one or more minerals. And lapis consists of lazurite, which is the blue, howine, pyrite, calcite, and some other minerals mixed in. It's a mixture. So lapis, the most ancient of gem materials, and one of the most popular worldwide, is a rock. Unicut is a granite. A granite. It's consisting of pink feldspar and green epidote with some mica thrown in. And you see this everywhere. Beads, cabochons, decorative objects. Unicut's been around for a long time. Everybody knows about it. It was named after the Unaka Mountains in Virginia, where it was first found. I was with my wife getting beads at a local supplier in Gaithersburg, and I'm looking down at all the stuff coming out of China, and I look down and there's these granite beads. Granite! Just granite, okay? But you look, some years ago we redid our kitchen. The best time my wife loves stones like I do. And we went shopping for countertops. So you go in these places and everything is a granite. Everything. Limestones, anorthosites. They don't care what, everything's a granite. Okay? But granite by itself comes in all these different colors and patterns. And you could make beads, you can make cabochons. It's just beautiful material. An endless variety of patterns and colors.
And it's granite.
Marble. Okay, everyone knows about marble, but look at what you can do with marble. And we have marble beads, but you can get any of these stones if you wanted to. Look at the colors. Pinks, greens, anything you want. It's a rock. Anorthosite, anybody that goes downtown and passes office buildings like in New York, you see this walking down the street. The facings, the rock facings of some of these big office buildings, and you see this beautiful blue winking at you. saying, oh my God, it's labradorite. How can that be labradorite? It's a rock. Well, there are rocks that are made up entirely of feldspar. And sometimes you get a feldspar rock that's made of labradorite feldspar. And it has the same blue labradorescence that you find in the Madagascar material. And it's gorgeous. So why not make carvings, cabochons, whatever you want? It's got pattern, it's got, if it's a small enough grain, you can make a nice big pendant out of that. And it's completely different looking, beautiful, hard. It's a rock. Charlotte is a rock. This stuff came out of Russia, I don't know, 30 years ago, whatever. And it's a mixture of charolite, tenapsite, microcline, and agerine, all these different minerals mixed together in this magnificent material. And it's usually cut as carvings and vases and stuff, but also makes beautiful cabochons. Another example of a rock being used as a gem. Rhyolite. Rhyolite. This is the volcanic equivalent of granite. Very, very, very fine grain, but with all of the impurities that give it the same color and pattern variety. And it's an infinite variety of patterns and colors in rhyolite. This is as pretty as just about any other gem material that you'll ever see. And there are billions of tons of rhyolite waiting out there for the market. The Earth's crust, as I've explained, is made up of rocks. There's enough gem material to supply the world forever. And so the phrase I started using is that all you have to do when you want to see the gems of the future, look down. It's lying there. Okay? But this has to be the future of the gem market if you follow the trends. Lower price points, pretty, different, available for the mass market. Where are you going to get this stuff? And the fine gemstones that we've been used to seeing are becoming less and less available. Gems, to recap, gems have always been part of our society. Prehistory, civilization, through the growth of the various societies and industrial growth, the redistribution of wealth into the modern age. And so there's a huge market base. Everyone can own gems, but the top quality stones are becoming very rare and very expensive. So interesting, history has a way of repeating itself. Where did we begin? At the beginning, in ancient times, only royalty could own jewels and gems. In modern times, the finest stones again have become collectibles, pursued and owned only by the wealthiest members of our society, of which there are more and more. And look at the auction prices now for the top-end gems. Nobody would believe these 20 years ago. $3 million a carat, $4 million a carat for fancy diamonds, the finest fancy diamonds. $1 million a carat for a top-end Burma ruby. Crazy, completely crazy. So what have we learned after 5,000 years? The journey of gemstones in the marketplace, from collector to commercial, and back again. We've come full circle. Only took 5,000 years. And here we are. Thank you very much.